So welcome everyone to the December 2021 textual study on the Bible and Beyond discussions. I'm your host, Shirley Paulson, and our presenter this evening is Dr. Hal Taussig. In this study, we'll be talking about the clash of violence and confidence, trust, vulnerability. This is the second in a series of 4 that examines the recent book, After Jesus, Before Christianity. This second session shows the centrality of Roman military conquest, torture, massive enslavement, imperial propaganda, and religious domination in its overarching violence against the peoples it conquered. So, Hal, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Shirley, and thank you all for being with us this evening. I want to say, before Shirley brings us into another dimension of this evening's program, I want to say just a little bit about the process of putting this book together. I'll hold it up. This is a Harper 1, a book just released within the last 6 to 8 weeks, and it's called After Jesus, Before Christianity. And it's a product of a number of scholars, about 20, ended up being 10 men and 10 women who worked together for a period of 8 to 10 years on the question of what went on in the first 2 centuries of Jesus' peoples. This is probably the only institution, which is the Westar Institute, which has long-term, deep seminars on key questions in the study of the Bible and beyond. And this is the only place that I know of in the country, maybe even further than that, where scholars come together for such a long period of time to get at a big question that the world and a lot of cultures have been eager to find out about. We generally, as a seminar, actually everything that we do, we try to do together. We vote on everything we study, and we come up with not always a complete agreement, but often a way of going forward together as scholars to know more. So thank you for coming into what has been already a 10-year process as this book just comes out. Shirley, why don't you get us into the first stages of what we're going to talk about this evening?
I'll be happy to do that. So I'm going to read a couple of passages from the book itself, and then there will be a couple of pictures that Hal is going to share with us that he'll explain. And then I'll read just a couple of more passages after that. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can follow along what I'm going to read to you here. The crucifixion of Jesus is exhibit number 1 for evidence of the violence at the heart of Roman rule. The basic facts about Roman crucifixion lay bare the charge. Crucifixion was the act of nailing a person to a makeshift tree until they slowly died. And 2, Romans crucified hundreds of thousands of those they conquered. And 3, such government crucifixions were intentionally undertaken as public torture and terrorism. And 4, many of the early communities of the anointed emphasized the centrality of crucifixion for defining who they were. Early anointed association envoy Paul said, "I know nothing but Jesus anointed and him crucified." The Gospel of Mark has Jesus saying, "Those who want to be a follower of mine, let them take up a cross." And then from Galatians, Paul understands himself and his relationship to Jesus' associations in terms of crucifixion by saying, "I am crucified with the anointed, and yet I am alive." So with that, Hal, tell us about these pictures.
Thank you. So this is a large series of basically sculptures in Asia Minor, current day Turkey. And I want to show you just a couple of these pictures to get us into the frame of reference of the first 2 centuries of the Mediterranean world. Here you see basically a large space that has the glories of the Roman Empire. And you can see basically 2.5 stories and 2.5 sections of what is the size of a football field. So this, what I'm going to show you, has so many dimensions of images from what the makers of this saw as the glory of Rome. And we will just look at 2 pictures that will get us towards one of the key questions, and that is the violence of the Roman Empire.
Want me to move to the next?
Please.
Yep.
So this is a sculpture. It's bigger than any of us, but there's 2 people, right? So the 2 people are actually mythical people. The top figure standing over the bottom figure is the Emperor Claudius. In other words, this represents the military led by the Emperor Claudius. And you'll see that he is standing over a woman whose right breast is bared. This woman is Britain. That is, this is the entire nation of Britain. And you'll see Claudius standing over it as he has conquered all of Britain. You'll see his hand raised high, and actually the sculpture doesn't have any more hands because they got broken off. But this is, you'll see the position of Claudius, the emperor, and you'll see that he is basically in back of her, entering down from the back of her. Most people who know this style of sculpture, most people think that he's in the process of raping Britain. So this is a picture of what Rome wants to claim about its glory, that its leader is in the process of raping an entire city. Let's look at another image. This is also not as graphic, but this is another in the same setting. And think of these pictures as being side by side, 2 stories high, for the size of a football field. This is the nation of Dakon. And Dakon is here portrayed simply as having been taken over and conquered by Rome. And the signal there is, again, the bearing of the right breast. So here, simply what we have is a picture of what Rome wants to see is its glory.
The Roman violence did not result in just dominion over a huge swatch of territory. At least as important was the way violence became a signature for the Roman character itself. As seminar member Celine Lilly's studies have demonstrated, the main stories of how Rome came into existence show rape as being an integral part of who the founders of Rome were. Roman soldiers regularly raped enemy soldiers who survived their battles. One more? I think, no, 2 more, yeah.
2 more.
A main prize of Rome's military conquests was an empire-wide program of enslavement. After every major battle or war, Roman soldiers captured thousands of inhabitants of the subjugated territories and enslaved them to serve the empire's ever-expanding domination. Strategic to this large program of enslavement was the transportation of many newly enslaved peoples to other parts of the empire. Following the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, almost 100,000 Judeans were sent to Rome to be enslaved. Many of these enslaved people built the Colosseum, the amphitheater, still central to tourism in central Rome today. Beside being enslaved through warfare, people were being enslaved for being in debt, committing or allegedly committing crimes, or being born of enslaved women. Slavery was everywhere throughout Roman society. Both the government and private individuals engaged in the slave trade. Most kinds of work received substantial support from the enslaved. The empire used the enslaved to construct huge monuments to Rome's glory.
Thanks so much, Shirley. Let's just stop here for a moment as we come together to see this first picture of Rome in charge of the entire Mediterranean basin and this character of how it ruled, mainly through violence, implicit and explicit. I'm wondering if we want to just stop here and ask if anyone wants to respond to this quick picture of the first dimension of Rome's glory, or would have a question that they would like to ask at this time in our time together this evening.
Hal, this is Joy.
Hi, Joy.
Hi. It seems to me that this is actually the same picture we see of the people in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures. That's what they did. They went around conquering each other and raping and enslaving and taking people to their country to be slaves. So this sounds like just the way things were around, that Rome isn't particularly different, just maybe stronger.
Thanks, Joy. That's really helpful. And that wasn't a question, that was a frame of reference that I want to thank you for. And I would probably say two additional things. One is compared to the size of Rome's territory, let's say Israel, is about the size of one street in a small town. In other words, this is there's a difference between nations and empires. Empires are a whole bunch of nations that have been conquered by someone else. So I think you're right that in one way that basically most, if not all, nations are often in battles. The thing one would want to add would be this, that the empires are so much more powerful and large than the nations. So that would be an addition to what you've said. And then the second thing is basically to say that, at least in terms of the larger territory of Africa and Europe and Near Asia, Rome, for at least 500 years on each side of its existence, Rome as an empire thinks of itself appropriately as the known, as the most powerful thing the known world has ever known at that time. So yes, I think you're right. It's really important to see the violence of a lot of that territory. What Rome knew about itself and all of the people that it conquered knew is that this was on a huge scale. And the main thing I think that we want to think through this evening at first is, so this is the place where the Jesus people started. So in other words, hundreds of thousands of people being crucified, hundreds of thousands of people being raped. And so that is a deep character of that part of the world that I frankly never learned in either my childhood Sunday school or my adult Sunday school. That huge character of what life was like has been basically left out of much of what we think. So thanks for saying, Joy, that this is a bigger picture. Any other thoughts or questions as we begin to take this in?
I have a comment also. One thing is that because of this mass enslavement of foreign nations, Rome actually destroyed its basic economy, because the man on the street or the man on his farm could not compete with slave labor. So he would lose his productivity. And as a result, the only thing, his main option was to join the military. And that's where these great big, huge mass armies came from, was people being forced off the land or losing jobs in the city. But ultimately, people got tired of these, they weren't able to keep going out and conquering new places. So you had people that were more and more unemployed and and not having a means of really supporting themselves. So the Roman state became almost a huge welfare state in Rome.
Thank you so much, Diana. That's a really helpful compliment to what Shirley showed us earlier. I want to just take a few more minutes for a little bit more of this frame of Roman imperial power. Another main thing that happened throughout the entire Mediterranean area was taxes. Taxes basically represent at a rate of about 20% per year for each population and for each person of the population. So, and all of that wealth that was taken from all around the Mediterranean, a lot of it went either to Rome itself as the capital, or to a way of trying to show the rest of the empire what Rome was giving it and what Rome was taking away. The second thing I want to say about Roman power and Roman violence is torture. So you've already seen those images in which what you have here is not simply violence, but you have a text, a big picture of what really mattered. And that was to give people deep fear for their lives all of the time. And so torture was common, although, for instance, the Roman law says that crucifixions are only for people who are trying to lead a revolt against the emperor. That is not the way it's carried out. We have these really wonderful or horrible texts from Roman documents in which they say, so what we want you to do, soldier units need to actually go out regularly into small villages, pick out some leaders in the village, and crucify them. not because they've done anything, but because they won't, so they will know not to do anything. This is all public terror and state terror at the same time. Finally, I would want us to really go back to, we don't have to need to go back to see it, but to think of that stadium that we saw full of the glory of violence. That stadium was between the temple of that city and the marketplace, right at the heart. And right at the heart, what did you see? But the glory of Rome framed primarily in violence. So what I would like us to say is that we as a seminar for the previous 10 years, one of the things we became aware of that had been simply left out of the history of the first 200 years of the Jesus movements is they were living under this violence. In other words, when I was in Sunday school, I thought there were only 3 people that got crucified. Jesus and the 2 other guys, right? As I learned in Sunday school. But actually, the image from all of the early writings, what that was saying to them was that Jesus is not an exception, but Jesus is a picture of what life is like. So it's not that Jesus is exceptional as being crucified, it's that he is like everybody else. One needs to think of every family in the Mediterranean as having, at least in every family, somebody having been crucified. What I want to take further here is if this was what the setting was of Rome in the 1st and 2nd centuries, who were the Jesus peoples? And here I want us to look at that in a really interesting contrast. I need to say a couple of things before characterizing a number of other things. But the main thing that we have learned, not just our seminar, but really scholarship for at least the last 50 years, is that the first 2 centuries of Jesus peoples were not at all united. In fact, there was nobody in charge of anything. By and large, for the first 2 centuries, you have the groups of Jesus peoples are diverse, often doing different things, and no one is the Pope or anything like that. Rather, and nobody's what our world knows as bishops, which are big-time people in charge of lots of people. The word bishop in those first 2 centuries is really the word for administrator. And they're often administering very small pieces of humanity. So we need to think of this picture of the beginnings of the Jesus peoples of the first 2 centuries as something that is very diverse and not a religion. Rather, it is a whole bunch of different groups, movements, schools, and wisdom circles that often were sort of related to one another and sort of not related. And they didn't want to be a big, major religion. They were thinking much more about simply having a life worth living and having a life with joy in it. And this was really starting to happen around the Mediterranean in a wide variety of ways. So I want to talk a little bit more of that in a minute, but let me first give us another chance to protest or think out loud or ask questions about both this violence and tiny little groups around the Mediterranean wanting to, as they said so often, have some good news.
I heard something else just recently, that North Africa, the area of Roman North Africa, had the most Christians, and that they were the most organized. And as soon as Constantine, made it possible for them to be legal, they really started opening up churches. So it was not like, it wasn't probably not necessarily what was going on in Europe per se, might be what was going on in North Africa or in Asia, because there were so many more Christians in these regions than there were in Europe.
Oh, thank you so much, Diana. That's a really wonderful thing for us to know about. Yes, we live in our own society in which Africa doesn't exist in our heads. Whereas, yes, it's very important that one know that some of the primary things that go on in the larger Christian early pictures is going on in Africa, and that was a very strong dimension of these Jesus peoples. Now, the second thing I would like to say, Diana, in response to this, and this is probably simply a small and a big matter of vocabulary, and that is the word Christian. So as we in our last 10 years in the Westar Christianity seminar, as we went through for 10 years the literature of the first 2 centuries of the many different Jesus peoples, one thing was missing. That was the word Christian. So for instance, if you look in the Bible, in the New Testament, which of course didn't exist at that time, but if you project those texts back on the first 2 centuries, in which we think that most of those were written in that time. But when you look back on that, in the entire eventual New Testament, how many times was the word Christian used? 3. How many words were there? 186,000. In other words, we project back on this setting, and we will deal with this in thorough detail next week, but we need to just at least touch base on this. Whatever these Jesus peoples were, and there are many different kinds of them, none of them thought of themselves as Christian. In the book, we look very carefully at those, by the way, little 3 words, and noted that actually that word doesn't really mean what 20th or 21st century Christians mean when they think about themselves. So get ready for some really good, close looking at texts next month on the 4th Monday as we look at that. But I did want to say that, Diana, what you are saying about this larger piece, especially in Africa, is so true. But none to hardly any of those people knew the word Christian or thought that they were it.
Sure, I was going to say that your description, Hal, makes this whole idea or concept of Pax Romana definitely false advertising, or really a description the subjugation of people, the silencing, the quieting of people, the control, and very different from the perhaps more enlightened rule of, say, the Persians or the Greek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
And one of the things that strikes me is that if you're living in a society that's based on terror and really undermining any certainty in life, that you have to have a way psychologically of dealing with the fear and embracing a savior who was crucified seems to be undermining that sense. It's like, I'm not going to play the game. You can be terror, you can inflict terror upon me, or you can inflict, but I'm not going to feel it. I'm not going to respond to the terror. I'm going to live in spite of it. And so I'm wondering, sort of thinking of the different Greek schools of philosophy, and how much of that, what were the other ways? What were the different ways that other groups were also trying to deal with this sense of terror that you were living under? Because I don't know that you could live embracing the fear all the time.
Thanks so much, Anita. This is really crucial for us to know. And the first thing I need to know is that we scholars, both you and I, are behind on that. I mean, first of all, the early Jesus peoples, of course, we haven't thought enough about them. But as you point out, most of the whole deal, they're less than 10% of people ruling this entire space of the Mediterranean basin. But our study of what violence does to whole cultures is very far behind. One of the ways we, in the last 10 years, began to get some grip on what the Jesus peoples were experiencing was also by just seeing what other people were experiencing. It's random violence to keep people from claiming life. We can't go further without you just underlining what you've said, Anita. Now, so let me now jump into one of the main other things that we have worked on for these 10 years on the book, and that is, so what were the things that people lived for in the Jesus groups? And again, please let me underline the fact that in this 10 minutes or so that I'm going to talk about that, the way I'm talking, I'm going to make it look like all groups are doing the same thing. And so I want you please to just say that I'm lying for the sake of speed, and that a lot of these examples that I'm doing are simply, some groups did this, other groups didn't do that. So let me start at where the title of tonight was, and that's the possibility of trust, the possibility of confidence, and the possibility of vulnerability. So those are three words that I want us to think about as to what we're going on in a variety of ways, in a variety of basically small groups. And so, for instance, let me say that one of the things that we discovered in our last decade of work was basically the one thing that almost all of these different kinds of Jesus groups did. And that was make sure more or less every week or so, have your group get together and have a really long meal with lots of wine, with lots of food, or at least as much food as you can find, lots of singing, lots of talking to each other about what happened and what didn't happen, what hurt and what was joyful. So in other words, the very most powerful part of these little groups' lives was taking time to relax, taking time to talk with each other, to sing with each other, and to ask questions with each other. And if you would, then add the word prayer, but know that the singing, the wine drinking, and the talk together would be what they thought of as prayer. In other words, it's not what we think of as our various many various churches and what they would think of praying. This is a very interactive way of living together. And it turns out that, and then let me say the one last thing that nobody knows about this until recently, really, and that is they're all lying down. They're all reclining. You can't eat in this whole system without simply really relaxing. When you and your folks get together, the only way that you know that you're really eating is when you're relaxing, looking at each other, talking. The dogs are there to pick up the scraps. So this is probably my main takeaway, and we'll get to more of this, but I want to say that whatever they were doing, it was a combination of their own vulnerability, of their own confidence, and their own creativity. So that's the first thing I want to bring front and center. And I'm going to stop here again to see what good questions, the counterpoints that we might need to think of as I lay this out. Something.
Another comment, because what it is I listened to a lot of stuff about this period. And it's interesting that the Roman aristocrats were really into Epicureanism or Stoicism. And that's what they spent a lot of time in. And this sort of explains why they were trying to control their own thought through these philosophies. Because they were probably just as much terrified, because especially if the emperors knew who they were, the emperors might want to come and take their money. And so they would trump up charges against them and get them killed or whatever and take all their property.
Yeah, 5 different emperors said to the entire empire, nobody's allowed to have meals together. In other words, they were trying to scare people out of this confidence, trust, and vulnerability that they held together when they were together.
Hal?
Yes.
This is Anita again. One of the things that also struck me when I was reading the book, when we started talking about, these dinners, these sort of supper clubs, I think was the way they were, that a lot of the things that went on there, the way I envisioned them were like support groups that we have, like in the transgender community, that have in other communities, where people come in and they're able to talk about and share the uncertainties in their life. They're able to get feedback that they wouldn't hear anywhere else, that they would, they'd be elevated. They would get to experience their human dignity in that space. And that in some ways that becomes almost what salvation means. I may be reading in here, but to me it was almost right like salvation was, not heaven or hell, but this idea of being saved from the despair of your situation, I guess would be one way of putting it.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. Again, yeah. So, for instance, the word, especially in the First Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures, the word salvation really means to be saved out of really bad things. And so salvation wasn't getting you to heaven. In both testaments, it was, in fact, getting you out of a situation where you might be killed or hurt or devastated by how much you've lost. And so for me, in terms of the New Testament, the perfect picture, of course, is in the Gospel of John, when Jesus is having a Last Supper. And what is happening on the couch? Somebody's laying in his lap. The beloved disciple, the beloved student of his, is lying in, as the old translation was, lying in his bosom. And so this is the way to think about, yes, a support group, but they really knew how to do that. In other words, it was and I say no wonder that those groups keep saying the body of Christ, because they really knew how bodies could save you if you let your bodies relax and be together. Helen, yes, please.
Just a quick quick comment. I lived in Southern Africa for 9 years, and it was during apartheid. And the most powerful group among the Black South Africans was the church. But it's the way you described the early Christians was exactly the way that church was, because it was their only support mechanism. It was where they were able to get together and sing and be joyous, and they supported each other, they fed each other. Eating was very important. And it was also the only place, as a suppressed people, where they had a voice. They could actually speak up and say their mind and be a vital member of that community, whereas in the larger society, they had no power at all. So they had power within that community. It sounds very similar and perhaps very common among oppressed people, that this is the structure of these, or the lack of structure.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the United States.
Yes.
The role the Black church has played in the United States.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So indeed, and I don't want to get us too far into our time, but certainly in the American sphere, there are only a few places where that kind of safety happened. And it's interesting. One's supposed to be very safe in America, but it's a different kind of safety than these groups were working at. Let me do a little Greek for and with you, and I hate scholars who flaunt their Greek, but I want to say one thing about one of these words, and that's confidence. So it turns out that the word confidence, if the translation were a little bit more accurate in our Bibles, the word confidence, the Greek word is pistis, and it's always translated now, in most of our Bibles, it's translated belief or faith. But what the basic word for it is confidence. And the basic word in say the Gospel of Mark, Matthew, and Luke is that story of the woman with the flow of blood. So she's been sick and bleeding for 12 years and goes to finally to see if Jesus can help. And the one thing, of course, in that society that bleeding women didn't do is touch. That's simply against the rule of a certain subsection of Leviticus 15. So the last thing she in a crowd can do is touch Jesus. But she does it anyway. That is, and the word for touching her is the word that Jesus gives back, and that is, you have had confidence. In a crowd which would just hate the woman who touched anyone when bleeding, it turns out that it's that confidence that Jesus in that story says saves you. Again, where you see in the New Testament the word translated belief, that makes us think about, now let me see, am I believing the right thing? Basically what that is a picture of trust and confidence. Shirley has helped me see that I shouldn't read too much from this book, but I'm going to read three things that have confidence at the base. Congratulations to those who grieve. They will be consoled. Congratulations to those who hunger and thirst for justice. They will have a feast. Don't fret about your life, about what you're going to eat, or what you're going to, or about your body, what you're going to wear. Remember, there is more to living than food and clothing. Think about how the lilies grow. They don't toil, they never spin. So again, there you get a little bit of a picture of not a movement or a set of movements that are wanting to get their belief right, but are trying to live into a vulnerability that can open each other to one another. And there's therefore, next time we'll be able to think a little bit about the word God and trust in that regard as we think further. We've got some a good 10 minutes or almost 10 minutes. Let me stop again, because as you can see, what happened in this seminar was a whole bunch of breakthroughs. And one of the main things that broke through in terms of how we were seeing these texts was that people simply have blocked out what goes on before the Christians arrive 2 centuries later. That is, we had to look back into what these words were really meaning. And it turns out that they were very embodied in the way that life was being lived. So let me stop and see if we can get a protest or two, or some other thoughts, or some questions.
I've been interested in the Aramaic teachings of Jesus through Neil Douglas Klotz and others. And one of the things that they have said in terms of language is that when it says your faith has made you well, that was a mistranslation. It would be as you give yourself to oneness, you are becoming well. And the understanding there was confidence with oneness, with fidelity. As you become one with the divine, you are becoming well, which has less to do with state of being. Well, I don't know. Anyway, so it's not a cure or a thought process. It's a lived process of becoming one.
Thanks so much, Karen. And as you probably know, because that same Aramaic movement is really helping people think about how to be dancers.
Right.
And it is true that Aramaic is a kind of forgotten language. My PhD leader made me learn Aramaic. I'm not quite sure if I was thankful for it, but at any rate, the Greek is actually very similar to Karen. So there's lots of good angles on that. Other thoughts or questions?
You know, I could say one other thing from a Westar conversation I heard, see if I got it right. That the word savior is someone who helps you put things back in the right order. To be saved is you're putting your life back in the right order. Does that resonate with you?
As you know, I'm not going to. I think no would be the wrong answer, but there's a lot more scariness in that, though, in those save words, by and large. So, in other words, think of the kind of the women on the run in the New Testament, and the armies and of Israel on the run. There, it's really like, ay, 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 just save me. I would not, I would want to say putting things together are sometimes in those texts, but I think that mostly it's just being rescued by the skin of your teeth.
Hal, there's a question in the chat asking if you could explain the meaning of confidence again.
Oh, well, I'm bouncing mainly off the Greek word, but it's there are three words that are the primary meaning is being having a sense of being able to use who you are, be able to be and have agency in your moment. Second word is trust. So the ability to, in a situation that is scary, to be able to have some trust in it. And then finally, the word belief is in fact okay if the way you use belief is like the words vulnerability and trust and confidence. What belief, pistis, the Greek, means generally is not have you got your creed together. That's not it. It's much more of an active relational agency. Okay, so let me then say just a couple of other words about who these very small groups are and what do they tend to do. One of their words is wisdom circles. So like the wisdom literature of both the First and Second Testaments, this is a place where you stop and look around at what your life is and what it's saying to you. So the wisdom circles are those. They're basically poor people who are philosophers. There are people who are not scholars like me. They're understanding a new kind of embodied wisdom that they can breathe in. One of the things that is in short supply in most of the wisdom texts and most of the gospel text with the stories is a set of what you should believe. So the wisdom folks are simply wanting to breathe deeply every day. They're really well known for taking a bath. If those of you who've been to Israel see those tiny little houses people lived in, and right next to them are big pools of water that are half as big as the entire house, that they can, when they want, simply go into the water, sometimes several people at a time, and relax. Anybody need to get one more word in from this, and then I'll say one more word about next month.
Hal, do the wisdom circles have anything to do with the Egyptian tradition of wisdom?
Yes, they do, Martha. So great to see you.
It's great to see you too. I don't have my video.
I saw you in church 2 weeks ago.
Right, that's right.
Yes, basically the wisdom of Egypt and Greece
Right.
Are coming at Israel from both sides, and they're
Right.
very similar.
Right.
So, Shirley, if I can say one word about next month, the thing about this book that is hitting the press first is we can't find the Christians. All of these people that we've been talking about are something other than Christian. So I've not wanted to talk about the big news on the front pages or whatever. I've not wanted to talk about that until we get a chance to think about the settings of both the good news people, meaning the people who want to live good news, and the larger scariness of living in that time. So now we've got that going. We're going to go next week or next month to look at carefully this question of what would we say about them if they're not Christian?
What a huge question you're leading us with, Hal. And thank you for helping us to really get that picture. I think you helped us stretch our minds a little bit about understanding the relationship between vulnerability and confidence and how that fits with violence. It's a very intriguing topic for us to think about. And thanks everybody else for your participation, whether you're listening or sharing your ideas. It's just great to have you with us. This was the December 2021 textual study on the Bible and beyond discussions on the clash of violence and confidence, trust, vulnerability, led by Dr. Hal Taussig. Once a month from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday nights, generally the 4th of the month, we provide a discussion on some early Christian texts. Dr. Hal Taussig leads these sessions, sharing a well-framed overview of these texts and allowing participants time to ask questions and share their insights. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. We look forward to seeing you next month for the third in the series on the recent book, After Jesus, Before Christianity. Thanks, everybody.